You remember when you were with the Beatles? You were supposed to be dead? That was a hoax, right?
Yeah, I wasn't really dead.
In October 1969, a disc jockey in Detroit received a call from a listener explaining that if some Beatles songs were listened to closely, clues would be heard.
Dad, this is amazing. If you play this backwards, it says Paul is dead.
Number 9, number 9, number 9, number 9, number 9.
Who do we have here? What's your name?
Number 9.
Well, it's Tom on the line. Yeah, hello, Tom. What's going down? I was going to rant with you about McCartney being dead, and what is this all about? You heard that McCartney was dead. Yeah, that's right. Someone got it to play this Revolution number 9 backwards. Yeah. And did you hear about that? No.
And I said, what are you talking about, playing a record backwards? He said, no, try it.
Number 9, number 9, number 9, number 9, number 9.
And I put it on, and it said very clearly, number 9. And when I played it backwards and spun it backwards, it said, turn me on, dead man. Turn me on, dead man. Whew. I freaked.
Fall of 1969, shortly after the release of Abbey Road, a rumor swept across the country concerning the death of Paul McCartney. The rumor received such widespread attention that stories appeared in Life magazine, Time magazine, and the New York Times, among many others.
This legend went that Paul had been killed in an automobile crash.
Well, maybe he did die.
You know, after this alleged death in November 1966, the Beatles never did tour again. You know, they hid themselves in the studio. So if, in fact, someone else was filling in for Paul, no one could ever detect it on a live concert stage.
The Beatles have kept pretty much to themselves in the last 7 or 8 months. They haven't released many single recordings. There have been thousands of rumors about their breakup. They'd say they're not going to tour anymore. They're not going to travel around.
Charming, I'm thirsty. Like there were moments he's carney exit.
Hey, can I have a word? Are the Beatles going to go their own ways in 1967? You know, we all get along fine. Do you foresee a time when, in fact, the Beatles won't be together and that you'll all be on your own?
No.
Do you get? Have you got tired of each other?
No.
No? You're going to be going your own ways instead of being in a group?
No.
No? What about another word? Can I just have a brief word with you?
Yeah?
If you never toured again, would it worry you?
I don't know. No.
What did this imposter look like? Well, Joel says if you look at the photo collage that accompanied the White Album, there's a small picture of Paul wearing glasses and sporting a mustache. Some say this is William Campbell's passport photo.
To perform is, it's difficult, gets difficult each time. Each time. Each time. Each time.
The controversy surrounding Paul McCartney was recently the subject of an hour-long report on radio. 5AD's Martin Smith presents the evidence.
Started in Detroit. A group of university students were playing tapes backwards and forwards, different speeds. They gave their evidence to a disc jockey in Detroit. His name was Russ Gibb, and together, collectively, they thought Paul McCartney had died. I understand they still do. The Beatles have made no live appearances for 3 years. There've been no records for a certain period of time in 1966. Anyway, the first record that came out after the lull of activity from Apple Records was Strawberry Fields Forever.
End of Strawberry Fields, I'm saying cranberry sauce, not iberry sauce.
What he was referring to was the fact that on that particular take, his guitar buried Paul's sound. And that's what he was saying.
What about I Buried Paul? Is it there?
It sounds like it is to me, yes. It sounds like John is saying, I buried Paul.
Did you hear it? I buried Paul.
The cover of Sgt. Pepper was a cornucopia of clues.
Look closely at the flower arrangements spelling out Beatles upon a square plot of soil, as if signifying the grave in which either Paul's body or the Beatles as a group is being laid to rest. Down below the flowers that spell Beatles, you'll notice yellow flowers that appear to be in the shape of a bass guitar. There are only 3 strings appearing and not 4. There's a toy car that looks just like the Aston Martin sports car that Paul drove at the time, and a white driving glove that has either red stains or blood on it. Now, within the bifold of the cover, there's a patch on Paul's left shoulder, which would appear to display the letters OPD. In England, OPD is an abbreviation for officially pronounced dead, similar to the American DOA, which stands for dead on arrival. The interesting fact here is that the patch does not display OPD, but does display OPP, which is for the Ontario Provincial Police. However, due to the chosen angle of the photograph, the patch does appear to display the letters OPD. Some professional graphic artists have insisted that there may have even been some visual manipulation of the image prior to its publication.
Looking at the codex provided in the CD's liner notes, we find that the drum skin was designed by somebody named Joe F. Grave. The only problem is, there doesn't appear to actually be anyone by that name. Could F. Grave just be a Leninistic play on words, like those inspired by John's favorite author, Lewis Carroll? F. Grave breaks down into F and grave. We know it's a grave, but what about F? F, EPH, could just be a shortened form of the word epitaph. And the drum skin does, in fact, bear a stunning resemblance to the epitaph of Lewis Carroll, inscribed on his memorial plaque inside Westminster Abbey. Both have the artist's nom de plume on the outside of the circle, but the inside contains the true epitaph. However, to read the epitaph, look on the right. It says, "He died." Who died? Follow the arrow. Paul died. Date? Let's look. We see 1, and the Roman numeral 9. That's 11, 9. He died.
Then we have friends and guests gathered and surrounding the grave as if they're giving their last respects. We notice that numerous faces in the funeral gathering also have sudden and tragic stories of death associated with their famous life stories. 8 of them experienced an untimely and sudden death. These include Lenny Bruce, Sir Robert Peel, Marilyn Monroe, T.E. Lawrence, Dylan Thomas, Tyrone Power, Sonny Liston, and finally, Stuart Sutcliffe, one of the original members of the Beatles. Moving on to other faces in the procession, Lewis Carroll, the author of fictional classics such as Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, and was one of John Lennon's greatest artistic influences. Aleister Crowley, who was a writer and hedonist and died in 1947, which was 20 years before these recordings and could relate to the intro lyrics. Did Aleister Crowley be the original Sgt. Pepper?
Aleister Crowley, the man who called himself the Beast 666, black magician, drug fiend, sex addict. The great beast died in 1947, and for a decade it seemed all his ideas had died with him. But then his do-what-thou-wilt philosophy found a new home with a generation that was experimenting with free love, drugs, and alternative beliefs. Crowley had pushed the same boundaries 40 years earlier. He was now a 60s icon. John Lennon acknowledged him as a personal hero by putting him on the front cover of the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper album. Sgt. Pepper album.
If you were to ask anyone who is the voice of Apple, who is the voice of the Beatles, who is the voice of both in London, the name would be Derek Taylor.
Hello? Hello? Yes, Derek Taylor.
Yes, sure.
How are you, sir? Why the preoccupation with death and exotic symbolisms of death?
Aware of any preoccupation with death or any symbolism? These are not things that we are aware of.
What about the Paul spelled out on the Sgt. Pepper's album, the guitar in flowers?
That's apparently there's a left-handed guitar there.
Yes.
On the grave.
Yes, it is a grave.
A letter from a man in Indiana today, because we are clearly dense in that we cannot see the symbolism. We'll live with that. We'll live with that description.
Nothing to do to save his life.
On the back cover of the record, there's another group photo of the Beatles, but this time Paul has his back to us and George is pointing to a line from She's Leaving Home. The line reads, "Wednesday morning at 5 o'clock as the day begins." That, according to the story, is Wednesday, November 9, 1966, the day and time Paul was officially pronounced dead.
Wednesday morning at 5 o'clock as the day begins. Yes! It's getting better all the time. Getting so much better all the time. I stepped from worse mistake. I stepped from worse mistake.
Really, England hasn't picked it up until I think last night.
2 days ago, probably. Mostly America. We've been told he's been dead for 2 years. So whoever we produce is going to have to be fingerprinted and voice taped and blood tested, and that'll be a lot of...
What steps has Mr. McCartney taken to compare the prints that he's now wearing on his fingers with the ones which were officially recorded back in the early 60s when he left the country?
Absolutely none. I don't think he has to.
Well, the question then arises as to whether or not the Beatles really want to shut down this publicity and set the stories to rest, or whether or not the sale of albums may be going so well that it would be a bad idea. And I ask you, why has Paul McCartney not said, okay, look, here's Scotland Yard, they have my prints, here's my fingers, they say I'm the same guy, let's stop the nonsense. He hasn't done that.
Yeah, I wasn't really dead. Yeah, I wasn't really dead.
Dr. Henry Truby, director of the university's Language and Linguistics Research Department, put the McCartney riddle to the so-called sound fingerprint test.
On the basis of the singing voice plus musical background analysis, that's the only way I can describe it because that's what it is. I have not been able to say that there were less than 3 voices, all of which were, according to Mr. Century, attributed on the label drawn to Paul McCartney. And we did look very carefully at the vocal output on these songs and on these selections, and these were my conclusions.
Dr. Truby says, I cannot conclude that the same voice appears in these early and late passages. Dr. Truby, by the way, has spent 20 years studying audio studies scientifically.
He wasn't there, that he didn't sing part of it or so on, but somebody else was singing at a time when the fans and when the label would indicate that it was Paul McCartney.
There are certain things on the Magical Mystery Tour album as well, visually and music-wise.
Magical Mystery Tour was the next album of recorded material to be released. The main character and symbol introduced here is the walrus. Many cultures refer to the walrus as a symbol of mysticism and spiritualism. But more importantly, English author Lewis Carroll incorporated a walrus as a definitive character and symbol within his works. Within the bifold cover of this album is a 24-page booklet. Paul is sitting at a desk with a sign in front of him stating, "I was." If you look closely at Paul's feet, you'll notice that he's not wearing his shoes. In fact, his shoes are a few feet away and in front of the drums. These have become known as Paul's blood-stained shoes. And it appears to read, "Love the 3 Beatles." You'll see all 4 Beatles in white tuxedos and walking away from a marble set of stairs. Each Beatle has a red rose attached to their lapel, except for Paul. His is black.
Fish wife, pornographic priestess, boy, you've been a naughty girl, you let your knickers down. I am the Eggman, they are the Eggmen. I am the walrus.
Villain, take my bird. If ever I will thrive, then it might not be. And if the letter was found Francis, I bring you Eggman out of Scotland. Seek him out among the British party. Or untimely death.
wrote the tune Glass Onion. And when we wrote it, we were thinking specifically, I mean, he wrote it mainly, but I helped him on it. And when we were writing it, we were thinking specifically of this whole idea of all these people who kind of write in and say, who was the walrus, John? Were you the walrus, or is Paul the walrus, or who's the walrus? So John, I mean, he happened to have a line, kind of go, all, and he said, yeah, the walrus was Paul. And we had a great giggle, you know, saying, yeah, let's do that, let's put this line in, because everyone is going to read into it, it's going to go crackers.
So you've had marvelous time,
The walrus was a nothing thing, not meant anything about anyone. It was very read into, and what happened was when we did Magical Mystery Tour and portrayed it, I actually put on the walrus mask. The one on that wall all swaying happened to be me with the walrus thing affair. We just picked up a head each. There's no thought behind it.
Philip Norman is the author of Shout, which many consider the definitive Beatles biography.
The Beatles is not a normal story, it's a supernatural story. McCartney won't tell you. Ringo can't tell you. John isn't here.
When you say Paul won't tell you, what do you mean?
He rewrites history all the time.
Was it Paul as the walrus? Do you mean in those costumes? Yeah. No, it's John. It's John as the walrus. Yes. The walrus is John.
Well, I had a black carnation because they'd run out of red ones. And I said, all right, I'll have the black one. I'll have whatever you've got on it. So I got this hugely significant thing of a black carnation.
If there was any connection between any of these things, which it sounds as though there is, you know, I must admit I'm as convinced as anybody could be that...
And so you've known a man who calls himself Paul McCartney both before and after November 1960.
Yes, I've known both of them.
Well, if he was dead, he had a jolly good impersonator.
Hey Jude.
some of your records backwards. There are some messages to it, and people can hear these. What do you have to say about the backward movement of these records?
I've no idea what Beatles records sound like backwards. I never play them backwards.
In charge of the Beatles recordings, George Martin.
You can cut, you can edit, obviously you can slow down or speed up your tape, you can put in backward stuff, you can put in backward stuff.
I don't remember any. I know we used to have a few things, but nothing's... No, we haven't put anything like that. We just... The whole thing was made up. I don't remember, you know.
What they're saying and what they're doing is sort of nothing strange about it. It's just dead straight.
Listen, don't worry about their questions. It's all coincidence. Paul McCartney isn't dead, and the only proof we have that he's alive at this point is that he is. It's coincidental. Unless they're there somewhere deep down there's a death wish, I don't know. That could be so.
I wonder, should I call you? But I know the wish I want out of yours. Why don't we do it in the road? Why don't we do it in the road? Oh, really, really want now. Oh, really, really want now.
Number 9, number 9, number 9, number 9, number 9.
You could tell what he was saying. His voice was low and his eye was high.
Accident. They talk about an accident on the B track. They talk about hitting a light pole and going to a surgeon. Are you familiar with that one?
Yes, I am, but it has no meaning, it has no relevance.
It'd be better go to see a sage or what a place Yellow Wonderful. So anyhow, he went to see the dentist instead of getting some hair and teeth, which wasn't any good at all.
You become naked. And mercury.
I had been the first one to write about this, and a lot of people mistakenly thought that I started the rumor, that it was me making it up. and not recognizing that I was just writing a story as a journalist.
I've never done anything, never done anything as a publicity stunt. Never sit around having secret planning sessions saying, here's our next strategy. No, I've never had any strategy.
I believe that this was intentional, that they wanted the masses to discover these inferences to Paul's death and take it as such and then let the rumor pass over.
I mean, we could have just thought, aha, click, let's use this and for evil, but there's no desire in any of our heads to sort of take over the world, That was Hitler, that's what he wanted to do. There is, however, a desire to get power in order to use it for good.
Protests, the music, the drugs, symptoms of a clash between generations. But that summer, 1969, here in Los Angeles, an aberration. The youth rebellion reached an illogical extreme, and then went even beyond that.
It was the summer of 1969 when the combination of drugs and do-your-own thing turned into the most bizarre murders of that decade. Actress Sharon Tate and 7 others were brutally stabbed to death.
Sharon not only didn't use drugs.
At the time, Tate was the wife of famed director Roman Polanski. Convicted of the savage slayings were Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwickel, Leslie Van Houten, and their charismatic cult leader, Charles Manson. He was described by his followers as a living Jesus, a guru possessing mystical powers strong enough to kill for.
He called himself Jesus and admired Hitler. And like both, Charles Manson, a career criminal, had followers. They lived at the old Spahn movie ranch above Chatsworth. It was there that Charles Manson let them in on his plans. They must commit random murders to trigger what Manson called helter-skelter, ideas Manson claimed he got from the Bible and the Beatles.
The motive behind the thing, I'm thoroughly convinced that it was the helter-skelter motive.
Manson's motive was summed up in Helter Skelter, the name of a song by the Beatles with the exact words smeared in blood at the La Bianca house.
He had an obsession with Helter Skelter. He constantly predicted that Helter Skelter was coming down.
What do you want to call me a murderer for? I've never killed anyone. I don't need to kill anyone. I think it. I have it here. Say all you time,
And I mean, we spent hours on it, really trying to get it dirtier and grittier and hoarser and the drums. Then someone listens to it and says, ah, ha, ha, this is a signal. And you have no control over that. He'd read a lot of biblical stuff into us.
Never learned not to love the Beach Boys.
Special music gift, give it to your lover. Love and understanding is for one another.
Charles Manson insisted that after interpreting the Beatles' music and lyrics, secret messages told him and made him and his followers commit these murders. The Beatles denied having anything to do with placing secret messages in their music.
Everyone's uptight about this. It's a negative trip, this is. It's a very bad trip for everyone. It's death, and it doesn't have any point, it doesn't have any purpose. It's a death trip, and it's no good, and it'll lead you into nothing.
Paul isn't dead. We don't often sing or refer to death. I don't think so.
And if they're fully switched on, like, and they're going, all you've got to do is sort of, oh yeah, but you used to do it, lads. You know, but we had a lot more incentive then. But we did, I mean, you know, those films you look at, that was us doing it, you know.
Well, if that's what doing it is, that's why I don't want to do it.
Yeah, I think.
Never like that. It's always
yeah, right.
And the last album, which has been released here in Australia, the Abbey Road album, probably musically we haven't been able to find too much yet. People have read certain things into certain tracks so far. But certainly the cover is rather fascinating. You have the four Beatles walking across Abbey Road.
With John Lennon as the spiritual leader dressed in white. Then Ringo Starr follows, dressed as most Undertakers would. Paul McCartney is death, out of step with the others, dressed in black, and barefoot because that's the way bodies are buried in many parts of the world, including England. And finally, his eyes are closed. And concluding the procession is George Harrison, in jeans, as the appropriate clothing for a gravedigger. In the background, to the left side of the road, you'll notice a fifth Beatle on the cover, LMW 28IF. Many phrases have been deciphered from the first three letters. The real find is the 28IF, as if to say 28 if. It just so happened that Paul would have been 28 if he didn't die. You'll notice the words Beatles spelled out on the wall above the words Abbey Road. And you'll notice that there are a series of round circles or dots preceding it. Well, when one connects these dots with a solid line, you end up with the number 3. So now it appears to be stating 3 Beatles.
You photographed the album cover Abbey Road, right? Yes, right. The zebra crossing was an idea which Paul came up with. Why the order? They say, like, John is the disciple, then we have Ringo the Undertaker. In the middle, of course, there we have the body, the corpse with its bare feet, and, of course, the grave digger. Why this order? The order I suggested was the way they normally spell out their names, John, Paul, George, and Ringo. But they said it doesn't have to be in any order, and it really just happened like this. Now we go to the back side, which you were telling me about. The only magic in this record cover was done in the darkroom by some very clever people who made Beatles and combined them with the basic picture of the wall and the girl walking by.
You recognize a 3 in front of the name Beatles in the back of the album made out by those dots?
Yeah, I think Peter Asher, or someone drew it.
But the dots were there before he picked up the pen.
Can I look at it?
Sure.
I wonder if you would do yourself a favor and get the album which was printed in England. I'd like to help you.
Is that a bad album, man?
Is that a bad album? Cover.
Defect on the cover?
Oh, the defect on the cover, the 3.
Fine, those
I really can't judge. I would like to see the original.
And then finally on the back cover, it's a perfectly clear photo of this wall, except there's this girl in blue walking through the picture. The girl's elbow, you see the lower profile of Paul McCartney's face really embedded in the girl's elbow. You see his nose, and then you see his lips, right where her elbow joint should be.
Paul just did his thing and took his shoes off and left him lying on the sidewalk and picked him up when the photographic session was over. I was barefooted because it was a nice day, and if it's a nice day, I don't like wearing shoes.
Once again, Derek Taylor from October 1969.
Paul McCartney isn't dead, and the only proof we have that he's alive at this point is that he is. You don't have to do any more than that to prove you're alive, except be alive. You don't have to produce yourself, you don't have to appear on television or speak, or even make a statement. You just have to be alive to make the point, if only to yourself. If people don't wish to be convinced, no amount of denial from Apple will make any difference.
So in late October 1969, BBC Radio 4, the news channel, dispatched reporter Chris Drake up to the Mull of Kintyre in Scotland to Paul McCartney's farm.
Paul, his wife Linda and their 2 children live in a little broken-down old farmhouse which even a poor farm labourer would think twice about accepting. He lives contentedly in isolation, walking in the day and watching television at night. He does have a telephone, but it's nearly always left off the hook.
I don't try to go with it. You might get some trouble.
Rolling Stone magazine declared Paul is not dead on the cover, and Life magazine had a photo of Paul and his family assuring distraught fans that Paul is still with us.
One of the clues in the Life magazine article of November 1969 is when they got a hold of Paul McCartney and said, "Tell us about the death of you." I mean, it was kind of a funny article. And he said, "Oh, I understand one of the clues is the OPD patch that says OPD on it, which in England stands for officially pronounced dead." He says, "Well, that stands for Ontario Police Department. And a fan from Canada sent me that."
The interesting fact here is that the patch does not display OPD, but does display OPP, which is for the Ontario Provincial Police. However, due to the chosen angle of the photograph, the patch does appear to display the letters OPD. Some professional graphic artists have insisted that there may have even been some visual manipulation of the image prior to its publication.
He rewrites history all the time.
I'm familiar that there was a man on tape from here, from Liverpool, a Liverpool voice, but that wasn't Paul. Paul hasn't done interviews for months.
But you definitely say it was not Paul McCartney.
Impossible.
Why?
He's on a vacation.
He's on a holiday?
Yes.
And has been for some time, is that it?
No, only about 48 hours. Tuesday night, I think, Wednesday morning.
Our pleasure to report that Beatle Paul McCartney is alive and well, and as he puts it, unconcerned about the rumors of his death. Well, there he is. He walks, he talks, he sings. Paul McCartney of the Beatles.
The conclusion you reach is that I'm dead, and then you're wrong. because I'm alive and living in Scotland.
Thank you, Mr. McCartney.
1, 2, 3, ah!
1, 2, 3, 4. Can I have a little more? 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I love you. All together, all together, all together, all together, all together, all together.
I thought of that for a moment, that maybe, you know, somewhere along the line the Beatles had concocted this thing or told somebody to start spreading the rumor, and I never got any indication of that. I mean, I looked for that. I sincerely wanted to believe that this was some kind of publicity stunt.
Had a different view. Hey there, Paul, what's new? Did Judas really talk to you, or did you put us on?
Terry Knight was a new singer. Apple Records made their announcement in early 1968 that they were going to cultivate talent. He was up to getting a record contract with Apple Records, but obviously it got canceled. So he goes back and jotted down a little song. When it first came out in May of 1969, it was published by Storybook, which was Terry Knight's publishing house. And something was worked out. And a month later, it's reissued by McLean. That is Paul McCartney and John Lennon's label. McLean Music was the publishing organ for the four Beatles, and in this one instance, Terry Knight St. Paul.
Mean everything people want, but there was never any specific "Turn Me On, Dead Man" or the other famous one that I won't repeat, where you played it backward and got a secret message. Our things are pretty straightforward. What it says, it means just about what it says. If it's imagery, it's imagery. If it's straight lyrics, it's straight lyrics, you know.
There will be an answer. Let it be. Let it be, let it be, let it be, let it be, keep it, keep it, keep it, keep it.
conceptualize, you know, looking for hidden meanings. You know, it's just gone crazy, that's all.
I mean, that was the big thing for me when that it happened in '66. It was after that, everything else seemed like hard work. You know, it was a job. It was like doing something I didn't really want to do. I was losing interest.
And the decision was whether to tell a lie or to tell him the truth, you know.
Is that a fresh pot of tea?
Yes. It's fairly fresh. This is actually a Beatle wife fixing the tea for one of the Fab Four ex-Beatles. Fab Three.
See Beatle Bill making a pig of himself.
Not doing so well these days, is he, Beatle?
Well, he's number 5 in Sweden.
Oh, in Sweden, that's it. I haven't been a Dylan follower since he stopped rocking, you know. I like Rolling Stone and a few things he did then, you know. I like a few things he did in the early days, but the rest of it's just like, you know, McCartney or something, you know. It's just no different, you know. It's a myth.
It is now widely understood that it was, in fact, the roadie Mal Evans who wrote the song Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and who named the album.
Paul McCartney has said it was easier being a Beatle than an ex-Beatle, and perhaps with good reason. He hasn't had a top 10 hit since the early 1980s. On top of all that, in the past few years, Paul McCartney has become the favorite target of rock critics who claim he's a prisoner of his past, relying on Beatles tunes to draw the crowds. And some would have you believe that he hasn't written anything relevant since his partnership with John Lennon.
I kind of ignore them. I don't really think they're important. Sorry, guys. I think I've written some real good songs. I think John Lennon liked me.
So Sgt. Pepper took you by surprise. You better see right through that mother lie. Those freaks was right when they said you was dead. though they may be parted, there is still a chance, Bill, that they will see.
The microscopes that magnified the tears studied warts and arms.
There was one piece of information that somebody gave me in London about this whole story that I'm not sure if it's key, but it certainly is important. And I'll let people just guess at what it is until I put it down on paper, and I may never see it. And the Beatles may not even be around, but someday it'll come out.
Can you take me back where I came from? Can you take me back? I've been getting it. I've been getting it. Come on, walk me around. I've been getting it. I've been getting it. Walk me around. I've been getting it. Walk me around. Walk me around. Walk me around.
So in fact, in 5 years' time, we may arrange the tunes differently, but we probably write the same on rumours.
But because the only thing about that, you see, is that performance for us, see, it's gone downhill, performance.
Oh, Johnny, you leave me and be lifted.
Oh.